the sun. Glorious, life-giving, tan-inducing sun. It was a Sunday, which for normal people meant brunch and existential dread about Monday. For John, it meant surf's up, brah. He yanked open his curtains, ready to greet the day with the enthusiasm of a golden retriever chasing a tennis ball. His beachfront property, a modest but charming abode he'd inherited from his late father, was his personal paradise. The sound of the waves, the salty air, the barely legal bikinis. What's not to love? Except, wait a minute, what in Neptune's name was that? Blocking his pristine view of the sparkling ocean was a fence. Not just any fence, mind you. This wasn't your cute little picket fence, whispering promises of neighborly chats and lemonade. This was a monstrosity, a towering barricade of beige vinyl, screaming suburban conformity and HOA tyranny. It looked like the Berlin Wall, if the Berlin Wall was designed by a committee of people who had never seen the ocean. John stared, then he blinked, then he checked his pulse, just to make sure he wasn't having a stroke brought on by too much sun and not enough sunscreen. Nope, he was alive, and furious. What the actual beach? He muttered, the words dripping with the kind of bewildered rage usually reserved for telemarketers and politicians. His first instinct was to grab a sledgehammer and reenact the climax of Office Space. But he figured that might lead to some unpleasant interactions with the local constabulary. Besides, he knew exactly who was behind this architectural atrocity. The HOA and their queen bee, Karen. John had always had a complicated relationship with the Homeowners Association. To him, they were a bunch of busybodies obsessed with lawn maintenance and the precise shade of beige allowed on exterior trim. To them, he was the rebellious free spirit who dared to leave his Christmas lights up until February and occasionally parked his vintage VW bus on the lawn for repairs. This fence, however, was a declaration of war. This wasn't about lawn ornaments or parking violations. This was about access to the beach, the lifeblood of his existence, the very reason he tolerated the constant drone of leaf blowers and the passive-aggressive newsletters about recycling etiquette. John grabbed his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. He punched in the HOA hotline number, the one that promised prompt and courteous service. After 5 minutes of elevator music and a robotic voice reminding him that his call was very important, he finally got a human. "Thank you for calling the Seabreeze Estates Homeowners Association," a voice chirped. "This is Brenda. How can I help you?" "Brenda," John said, trying to keep the fury out of his voice. "I'm John at 12 Ocean View Drive. There's a thing, a beige, vinyl, soul-crushing thing blocking my access to the beach." Brenda paused. "Oh, you mean the new community barrier?" "Community barrier? Brenda, it's a freaking fence, and it's blocking my view, my access, and possibly my will to live." Brenda remained unfazed. The barrier was approved by the board to enhance the aesthetic appeal of the neighborhood and prevent unauthorized access to the beach. Unauthorized access? "Brenda, I own beachfront property. My deed has more mentions of ocean and sand than a Jimmy Buffett song." "I understand your frustration, Mr. John," Brenda said, her voice dripping with the practiced sympathy of someone who deals with angry homeowners on a daily basis. "But the decision is final. The barrier is here to stay." John hung up, the phone practically smoking in his hand. He knew he couldn't reason with Brenda. She was just a cog in the HOA machine. He needed to go straight to the source, Karen. His first attempt to contact Karen went straight to voicemail. He left a message, filled with sarcastic pleasantries and veiled threats about unleashing a swarm of seagulls on her prize-winning petunias. No response. He tried email. Still nothing. It was like trying to communicate with a brick wall. A beige vinyl brick wall. Finally, John decided to take matters into his own hands. He knew the HOA had a monthly meeting scheduled for that evening at the community clubhouse. A sterile, beige-on-beige building that looked like it was designed to suck all the joy out of life. He decided to crash the party. He arrived at the clubhouse just as the meeting was getting underway. The room was filled with the usual suspects. Meticulously groomed women in pastel sweaters, stern-faced men in khakis and golf shirts, and a general air of suburban malaise. At the head of the table sat Karen, her perfectly coiffed blonde hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights, her face set in a permanent expression of disapproval. John took a deep breath and walked into the room, his vintage Hawaiian shirt a splash of color in the beige monochrome. All eyes turned to him. Well, Karen said, her voice dripping with condescension. If it isn't our resident beach bum. What brings you here, John? The fence, Karen, John said, trying to keep his voice level. The ridiculous, soul-crushing, beach-blocking fence. I'm here to ask you politely to take it down. Karen raised an eyebrow. Politely? That's a new approach for you, John. I'm almost disappointed. She turned to the other members of the board, a smug smile on her face. As you all know, the fence was approved to improve the security and aesthetic appeal of our community. Aesthetic appeal? Karen, it looks like a prison wall. And security? Who are you trying to keep out? The tide. We've had reports of unauthorized individuals using the beach, Karen said, her voice hardening. People who don't live in the community, who don't contribute to our property values. So, you're saying you're building a wall to keep out the pores? John asked, his voice laced with sarcasm. A gasp rippled through the room. Karen's face turned a shade of red that clashed horribly with her lipstick. That's a ridiculous accusation, John. We're simply trying to maintain the quality of life in our community. By blocking access to the beach, by destroying the view, by turning our little slice of paradise into a gated community for the terminally beige. The decision is final, John, Karen said, her voice cold and dismissive. The fence is staying. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have more important matters to discuss, like the proper placement of petunias in the community garden. John stood there for a moment, staring at Karen's smug face. He knew he wasn't going to win this argument. Not here, not now. But he also knew that he wasn't going to give up. This wasn't just about a fence. This was about his father's legacy, about the soul of the beach, about the right to wear a Hawaiian shirt without being judged by a bunch of beige-obsessed suburbanites. He turned and walked out of the clubhouse, the laughter of the HOA members echoing in his ears. As he walked back to his house, the anger inside him began to simmer, slowly transforming into a burning desire for revenge. He knew that taking down that fence wasn't going to be easy, but he was determined to find a way. He needed a plan, a strategy, a way to make Karen and the HOA regret the day they ever laid eyes on a vinyl fence. Sun Tzu had The Art of War. John had Google and a questionable understanding of guerrilla warfare gleaned from late-night action movies. His first idea, while tempting, was quickly discarded. Filling the HOA's meticulously manicured flower beds with strategically placed plastic flamingos seemed a bit too obvious. He needed something more subtle, more insidious, something that would drive Karen absolutely bonkers without technically breaking any HOA rules. Too much. That's when inspiration struck, like a rogue wave of genius. John's plan was simple, elegant, and utterly infuriating. Psychological warfare. He was going to become Karen's personal nightmare, a constant, nagging reminder of her utter lack of beach-loving soul. Operation Karen's Kryptonite commenced the next morning. At exactly 6 a.m., just as Karen was likely enjoying her organic green smoothie and contemplating the proper angle for her garden gnomes, John cranked up his stereo. Not to some obnoxious heavy metal, mind you. Oh no. He played a continuous loop of the cheesiest, most saccharine beach-themed songs he could find. Think Kokomo by the Beach Boys, Margaritaville by Jimmy Buffett, and, for extra measure, a synthesized rendition of Under the Sea from The Little Mermaid. The effect was immediate. Within minutes, Karen was pounding on John's door, her face contorted in a mask of fury. Turn it down, John. Turn it down this instant. I can't hear myself think. John opened the door, wearing a pair of ridiculously oversized sunglasses and holding a coconut with a straw sticking out of it. Good morning, Karen. Just enjoying a little island vibe. You know, trying to get that beach feeling since someone decided to block my access to the actual beach. Karen's eye twitched. You're doing this on purpose, aren't you? Doing what? Sharing my love of tropical music? Is that against the HOA rules now? Because I distinctly remember reading something about promoting a positive community environment. Karen sputtered, unable to find a coherent response. Just turn it down, she shrieked, before stomping back to her house, muttering about noise ordinances and the general decline of suburban civilization. John smirked and cranked up the volume another notch. The sweet sound of manufactured tropical bliss filled the air. This was going to be fun. Over the next few days, John continued his campaign of subtle harassment. He started leaving anonymous notes on Karen's doorstep, filled with flowery prose about the beauty of the ocean and the importance of preserving our natural resources. He even sent her a framed photograph of a majestic seagull, with a note that read, "May this majestic creature remind you of the freedom and joy that the beach provides." Karen, predictably, was not amused. She started avoiding John at all costs, crossing the street whenever she saw him coming, and even installing security cameras to monitor his activities. John, of course, took this as an invitation to step up his game. He began wearing increasingly outlandish beach-themed outfits whenever he left the house. Hawaiian shirts that could blind a small child, swim trunks with inflatable sharks attached to them, and even a full-body banana costume, don't ask. He'd stroll past Karen's house, whistling loudly and carrying a surfboard, just to remind her of what she was denying him. One afternoon, while rummaging through a dusty box in his attic, John stumbled upon a treasure trove of old photographs and documents. It was a collection of his father's belongings, carefully preserved by his mother. As he flipped through the yellowed pages, a whole new side of his dad began to emerge. He knew his father had loved the beach. He had grown up surfing those very waves, spending his summers building sandcastles and chasing crabs. But he had no idea just how deeply his father had been involved in the community, how much he had fought to protect the beach from developers and preserve its natural beauty. There were photographs of his father leading protests against a proposed high-rise hotel that would have blocked access to the beach. There were newspaper clippings praising him for his tireless efforts to clean up the coastline and protect the local wildlife. And then he found it. A faded document, signed by his father and the original developers of Seabreeze Estates, guaranteeing public access to the beach in perpetuity. John's jaw dropped. He had always thought of his father as just a regular guy, a loving dad who liked to surf and grill burgers. But now he realized that his father was a local hero, a champion of the beach, a true environmental warrior. And Karen, with her stupid fence and her obsession with beige, was desecrating his legacy. A wave of righteous anger washed over John, stronger than anything he had felt before. He knew he had the ammunition he needed to win this fight. He had the documents, the photographs, the proof that his father had played a crucial role in establishing Seabreeze Estates and guaranteeing public access to the beach. Now, all he had to do was figure out how to use it. But first, he decided to take a break. He grabbed his surfboard, donned his banana costume, and headed down to the beach, where he proceeded to perform a series of hilariously inept surfing maneuvers, much to the amusement and horror of the other beachgoers. He figured he deserved a little fun. After all, the real battle was just about to begin. And Karen, bless her beige little heart, had no idea what was coming. The revenge was going to be so sweet, it would give you a cavity. His first move was to rally the troops. He started by reaching out to his neighbors, the ones who had always given him a knowing wink and a thumbs up when he blasted beach music from his patio. He organized a clandestine meeting at his house, complete with strategically placed tiki torches and a pitcher of suspiciously strong tropical punch. "All right, people," John said, addressing his ragtag crew of rebels. "We're here tonight to discuss the tyranny of the HOA and the liberation of our beloved beach." His neighbor, a retired accountant named Mildred, raised her hand. "Will there be snacks?" "Absolutely, Mildred. I've got pineapple skewers, coconut shrimp, and enough rum to sink a small yacht." Mildred grinned. "I'm in." With Mildred on board, the rest of the neighbors quickly followed suit. They were tired of Karen's endless rules and regulations, tired of the sterile conformity of Seabreeze Estates, and, frankly, they were just looking for a good excuse to drink rum on a Tuesday night. John outlined his plan, a multi-pronged attack designed to undermine Karen's authority and expose her hypocrisy. First, they would bombard the HOA with a deluge of ridiculous complaints and requests, clogging up the bureaucratic system and driving Karen to the brink of madness. He would request a variance to paint his house in a rainbow of tropical colors, citing the therapeutic benefits of vibrant hues. Mildred would demand that the community garden be replanted with edible seaweed, claiming it was a sustainable and delicious alternative to boring old vegetables, and so on and so forth. Next, they would stage a series of performance art pieces designed to highlight the absurdity of the fence and the importance of beach access. They would hold synchronized swimming routines in John's backyard pool, visible from the street, wearing Speedos and inflatable dolphin costumes. They would organize a beach cleanup on the other side of the fence, meticulously picking up imaginary trash and waving cheerfully at the bewildered residents on the other side. But John's most ambitious plan involved his father's documents. He decided to create a public exhibition, a celebration of his father's life and legacy, right on the beach. He would display the photographs, the newspaper clippings, the legal documents, all the evidence that proved his father's crucial role in establishing Seabreeze Estates and guaranteeing public access to the beach. He would invite the local media, the historical society, and anyone else who might be interested in the story. He would force Karen to confront the truth in front of the entire community. The exhibition was scheduled for the following Saturday. John and his neighbors worked tirelessly to prepare, transforming the beach into a makeshift museum. They erected a tent to protect the documents from the elements, strung up fairy lights to create a festive atmosphere, and even hired a steel drum band to provide some appropriately beachy background music. As the day of the exhibition approached, John could feel the tension building. He knew that Karen was aware of his plans, and he expected her to try and sabotage the event. He just didn't know how. On the morning of the exhibition, John woke up to a disturbing sight. Someone had vandalized the beach, spray painting graffiti on the rocks and scattering trash across the sand. It was clearly an attempt to disrupt the event and discredit John. But John wasn't deterred. He rallied his neighbors, and together they cleaned up the beach, removing the graffiti and collecting the trash. They were more determined than ever to make the exhibition a success. As the guests began to arrive, John stood at the entrance to the exhibition, greeting them with a warm smile and a heartfelt thank you. He told them about his father, about his love for the beach, about his tireless efforts to protect it for future generations. He showed them the documents, the photographs, the evidence that proved his father's legacy. The crowd was moved by John's story, and they were outraged by Karen's actions. They began to chant, "Tear down the fence! Tear down the fence!" 2. That's when Karen arrived, accompanied by a group of HOA board members and a stern-faced lawyer. She marched up to John, her face red with anger. "This is an illegal gathering, John," she shouted. "You're trespassing on private property and disrupting the peace." John remained calm. "This isn't private property, Karen. This is a public beach, guaranteed by my father's agreement with the original developers of Seabreeze Estates. And I'm not disrupting the peace. I'm celebrating the life of a local hero." He gestured to the crowd, who were now chanting even louder. "Tear down the fence! Tear down the fence!" Karen's face crumpled. She realized that she had lost. She had underestimated John, and she had underestimated the power of the community. She had tried to erase his father's legacy, but she had only made it stronger. The lawyer whispered something in Karen's ear, and she nodded reluctantly. "Fine, John," she said, her voice barely audible above the chanting. "We'll take down the fence." A cheer erupted from the crowd. John smiled, a feeling of triumph washing over him. He had done it. He had defeated Karen, he had reclaimed the beach, and he had honored his father's memory. But the story doesn't end there, folks. Because as Karen turned to leave, John couldn't resist one final jab. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small plastic flamingo. He walked up to Karen and gently placed it on her head. "Just a little something to remember me by, Karen," he said, winking. "And maybe, just maybe, a reminder to lighten up a little. Life's too short to be beige." And with that, John turned and walked back to the beach, where the steel drum band was playing a lively rendition of Kokomo, and the crowd was celebrating their victory with pineapple skewers, coconut shrimp, and plenty of rum. The day after the exhibition was a whirlwind of activity. The HOA, under the watchful and slightly bewildered eyes of the community, began the process of dismantling the infamous vinyl fence. It was a slow, laborious process, made all the more comical by the fact that the workers seemed to have no idea what they were doing. They struggled with the screws, they tripped over the fence posts, and at one point, one of them even managed to get his head stuck in a section of the fence, requiring a rescue mission involving a crowbar and a lot of nervous laughter. Meanwhile, John was basking in the glow of victory. He was interviewed by the local news, hailed as a hero by his neighbors, and even received a handwritten letter from Jimmy Buffett, praising his parrot-head spirit and inviting him to a luau. But amidst all the celebration, John couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. He had won the battle, but the war wasn't over. He still had to find a way to bridge the divide between himself and Karen, to heal the wounds that had been inflicted during their suburban turf war. He decided to take the first step. He baked a batch of his famous coconut macaroons, a secret recipe passed down from his grandmother, and walked over to Karen's house. He rang the doorbell, bracing himself for a frosty reception. Karen answered the door, her face pale and drawn. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. The plastic flamingo was nowhere to be seen. "John," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want?" "I brought you some macaroons," John said, holding out the plate. "My grandma's recipe. They're supposed to be good for stress." Karen hesitated for a moment, then reluctantly took the plate. "Thank you," she said. "That's thoughtful." John stepped inside, and they sat down at Karen's kitchen table, an awkward silence hanging in the air. Finally, John spoke. "Look, Karen," he said, "I know we've had our differences, and I know I haven't exactly made things easy for you." Karen sighed. "That's an understatement. But I don't want to be enemies," John continued. "I just want to live in a community where everyone can get along, where we can respect each other's differences, and where we can all enjoy the beach." Karen looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resignation. "I just wanted to do what was best for the community," she said. "I thought the fence would improve property values, reduce crime, and create a more cohesive neighborhood." "I understand," John said. "But sometimes the best intentions can lead to the worst outcomes. Sometimes you have to listen to the people, to the community, and to the history of the place." Karen nodded slowly. "I know," she said. "I learned that the hard way." They sat in silence for a few more minutes, eating macaroons and contemplating the complexities of suburban life. Then Karen spoke again. "So," she said, "what do you propose we do now?" "I propose we work together," John said. "We find a way to balance the needs of the community with the rights of the individual. We create a Seabreeze Estates that is both beautiful and inclusive, both orderly and fun." Karen smiled, a genuine smile this time, the first John had seen in a long time. "I'd like that," she said. And so, an unlikely alliance was formed. John and Karen, the beach bum and the HOA queen, joined forces to create a better Seabreeze Estates. They started by organizing a series of community events, beach cleanups, potluck dinners, and even a tropical shirt Tuesday, where everyone was encouraged to wear their most outrageous Hawaiian attire. They also worked to revise the HOA rules, making them more flexible and less restrictive. They created a community garden where residents could grow their own fruits and vegetables, including, at Mildred's insistence, edible seaweed. And they even established a beach appreciation committee dedicated to preserving the natural beauty of the coastline and promoting responsible beach use. It wasn't always easy. There were still disagreements, still moments of tension, still the occasional passive-aggressive newsletter from the HOA. But John and Karen were committed to making it work. They had learned that by listening to each other, by respecting each other's opinions, and by finding common ground, they could overcome any obstacle. And as for the fence, well, it was eventually replaced with a series of strategically placed benches and picnic tables, creating a welcoming space for residents to gather and enjoy the view of the beach. The benches were painted in a rainbow of tropical colors, a subtle tribute to John's earlier and rejected request to paint his house in a similar fashion. One sunny afternoon, John and Karen were sitting on one of the benches, watching the waves roll in. John was wearing his favorite Hawaiian shirt, and Karen was sporting a stylish sundress. They were both smiling. "You know, John," Karen said, "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm actually starting to enjoy the beach." John chuckled. "I told you it was good for the soul." He paused for a moment, then added, "And by the way, I still think you'd look great in a banana costume." Karen laughed. "Don't push it, John." And so, life in Seabreeze Estates went on, a little bit more colorful, a little bit more chaotic, and a whole lot more fun. The battle of the beach was over, and in its place had emerged a sense of community, a spirit of cooperation, and a shared appreciation for the simple joys of life.